Welcome to Liner Notes. My name is David Bixler.
Guitarist Rez Abbasi's recordings illustrate an artist that is pressing on, going for something new, rather than making alterations to what he has already done. So when sitarist Josh Feinberg approached him about a possible Indian jazz collaboration, he initially declined, as he already had several successful recordings of this nature with pianist Vijay Iyer and saxophonist Rudresh Mahanthappa. However, he fortunately reconsidered, and they recorded Charm, a recording that is fresh and likely unlike anything that you have heard before. Rez, welcome to Liner Notes. Interesting to know that we're actually kind of neighbors here, but here to talk about your new recording, Charm. And it's a cooperative with Josh Feinberg on sitar.
Yeah.
Very cool. And can you tell, I don't know, the group's name is Naya Baz?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. Okay. That's and what does that mean?
It means new falcon, but we coined it as new bird because it's like, yeah, that's what it's called, new bird. Yeah.
Okay.
We had a hard time coming up with a good name. The first one we came up with ended up being a Bollywood movie or something from years ago. We're like, no, man, no. And I love the name. I even forgot what it was, but so because of that, we just kept digging, and New Bird sounded appropriate. You know, it is that. It's very special. It's very different than sort of any sort of East meets West kind of configurations we've had in the past. And that's the only reason I did it, because of because it's different and creative and unique.
All right. Now, has this group or project been around for a minute, or is this the first offering?
No, this is the first offering. Yeah. I mean, Josh actually came to me years ago, a couple of years ago, and, pandemic, it kind of, skews everything really perspective wise. But he came up to me a few years ago and said, do you want to do a project? And of course I was like, no, because, I've done projects with Indian classical music, and as good, as amazing as, things can turn out, there are always limitations, to that. And I've already done that. So with those two ideas, it was sort of like, nah, not really. I don't, but then, I asked Josh his background because I didn't know him too well. And he had studied with Dave Holland. He plays jazz bass too. So he studied with Dave Holland. He studied with Paul Bley and a bunch of friends that I know out here in New York. And I thought, wait, you're a jazz player. And I kind of had that inkling, and he is a jazz player also. So, but he's dedicated the last 2 decades to Indian classical and not jazz. So I knew he was serious, but with that seriousness came this huge, wheelhouse of other ideas. So that's essentially the genesis of the project. When I found that out, I was like, okay, well, you know what? Maybe we can actually sort of do what I've done in the past, but sort of really expand it to another level, and sure, it happened that way.
Right. Had you played with him before in any kind of configuration?
No, he's a bit younger than me, so it's maybe it's a generational thing, but it's also just because I think he was in New York for a while, then he moved to Portland, and I didn't see him for probably 10 years. And maybe I've heard of him before, but no, we never really had, any configurations to play or anything like that. I mean, like I said, he is very deep into Indian classical music. So that's something I'm into, but not even close to what he's into, So I don't hang around those circles that much anymore.
Is he still active as a bass player?
Yeah, once in a while. Yeah. I mean, you have to make a living. So he does that on occasion, I would suspect. I mean, you'd have to ask him, but I think, if he can play bass, yeah, he'll do that for sure.
He's going to do that. Okay.
He doesn't do that in the band, but in this band, he doesn't do that.
Right. Well, okay. So let's talk about the rest of the band. Did you and Josh put the players together, decide what you wanted? Because it's interesting the role of the cello in this band and the percussion. I mean, it's not drum set like as your typical jazz thing. So maybe talk about the thought that went into choosing these musicians.
Yeah, basically, he left it up to me to, because I know the people out here, the jazz people and sort of the versatile jazz people. And so he left it up to me. And Jennifer was part of a film project that I did a few years ago. and she played upright bass and cello. So that's a rarity. So it's nice to have someone that can do both. It makes the composer aspect of it all really open, and you can really, find different colors, find different orchestrations. Of course, with the upright bass, you can bow too, but there's something about the cello that's very unique. And then Satoshi I use on a few. We've been playing for years, and I had him on one of my records a little while ago, a few years ago, maybe 10. Boy, it's gone by. And we've been friends for a long time, and I know he approaches the drum set as a percussionist, which is a very, it sounds simplistic because, of course, drummers are percussionists, right? So somebody might say, well, what do you mean by that? But it's very nuanced. There is a subtlety that you can hear that's different than, sort of your everyday great jazz drummer. And I love playing with them too as well. So but for this project, at first we were thinking a heavier percussion sort of hand drum thing happening. But then, I wrote a lot of the music. Josh also, we were collaborated, but I ended up writing a few tunes myself. And I just, I'm sort of a ride cymbal-y kind of a guy. I have that in my head. And sort of when you take away some of that for a whole tune or for a whole record, in fact, it becomes like something's missing for me sometimes. So I asked Satoshi to sort of rein it in with the percussion and play drum set and then add the percussion to that. And that came out well. And also Michael Serene plays with us now as well too. So depends on not the whole. It's not a quintet. I mean, Michael replaces Satoshi often. So he's also another one who sort of approaches it in that way. And strangely enough, they're both highly influenced by one of my favorite drummers, who's Paul Motion. And that's maybe part of where it's coming from.
Gotcha. You spoke about the music being, you collaborated with Josh on the things. Tell us about that process a little bit. Was it a back and forth, or were you guys in the same room kind of just playing?
Yeah, well, first I was in LA visiting my folks for a few weeks. This was just in the midst, or maybe at the end of the first year of the pandemic, or the first year and a half. And that's when the project started. It's our pandemic project, if you will. And I would just, before the day started, I would sit on the couch for, 2 strong hours and focus on this stuff, this new material, and then go out and then come back for another hour or two. So, the way it started is, first of all, I have to see if we can do this. So, the initial tune I wrote was somewhat of a test to see if we can pull this off. Like, in other words, I didn't want to be confined to sort of one scale or one raga, if you will, which that happens sometimes, right? With these collaborations, it's like, they can't sort of step outside of things once they're in it. With Josh, I'll get to this in a minute, but so what I ended up doing is I wrote a tune just, intuitively, this is what I want to write. And I sent it to him, and I was kind of hoping he would come back with like, yeah, I can do it. But at first he was like, man, I don't know if I can do this. He was kind of like, he's not, I didn't write the music down. I just gave it to him orally. So he listened to it, and then the next day he goes, oh, you know what? I found out a way I can do it. I moved a fret and all this stuff. And what I was going to say is, eventually when we started writing together, he actually had a luthier build him a new kind of sitar in order to be able to pull off this music, which is really something I didn't expect. The luthier added something on there to make it more, a bit more versatile. I don't know the science behind the sitar and how it exactly works in terms of playing. I've never played one, but that opened the doors to the kind of ideas like, okay, now we can think more chromatically. key right there and modulate from key to key, so it doesn't sound like sort of one thing. So it's interesting. It's very jazz heavy with the world, whereas with the world aspect. Whereas if you hear people in the past do this, it's usually like sort of the Indian thing is like 75%, and the jazz ideas are like 25%, or not even maybe that, just in improvising. So this is sort of the opposite, which is very unique, very interesting.
It sounds great. I didn't know really what to expect when I heard it. And, like harmonically also, I was really kind of blown away. It's like super cool. I mean, there's even like some kind of like hooky type things. You're like, some singer-songwriter. I mean, they're just super hip. I mean, it's beautiful. Sonically, it's super cool to like get into it, as a listener. It's very, I mean, we hear so much music as musicians, and so much great music. And like to hear something that kind of piques your interest, like, man, I haven't heard anything like this before.
Yeah,
and
coming from you, that's I'm very psyched to hear that, because, it's a weird thing. Like, I think Thelonious Monk said that. He's obviously one of our heroes, but he said something like, when he writes music, he wants it to be audience friendly. I'm paraphrasing, audience friendly, but he wants it to be musician incentivized by musicians also. Like, he wants them to be impressed. I don't know how he said it, but that stuck to me. I was like, wow, that's like sort of the best of both worlds. And you know what? You listen to any of his tunes, and that's basically what it is. It's like grandma can sing that and enjoy it, and yet like Keith Jarrett can play it and be wowed by it. He's really grabbed something that's maybe not even talked about enough.
I want to go back to the Indian classical music. Now, you were actually born in Pakistan. Now, what are, I have to plead ignorance, the difference between the two? I assume they're separate genres, or are they related enough that...
Well, I mean, Pakistan and India and Bangladesh used to be one country, and so the partition took place, which was, you hear about Gandhi and Mahatma Gandhi, but then Bangladesh also separated from Pakistan later, so I'm getting confused. But it's all one region. It's very similar culturally. Now, of course, the religions have separated them. There's different cultures within the culture of the religion. So in ways that they create music, I think I don't really call myself either one. My dad was actually born in Bombay, and my mom was born in Pakistan. So before partition. So when the partition happened, my dad went to the Pakistani side. So is he Indian? Is he Pakistani? I don't know. So I was born in Pakistan, but that was just a number of decades after the war. So it's hard to pinpoint it, but culturally and musically, they're very similar. There are shades of different, like South India, the Carnatic music is a little different than the North Indian music, which is different than the Pakistani ghazals and let's say a Qawwali music, and now of course India also has Qawwali music and ghazals, but they're just a bit different, And you might have heard of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. He was a big giant in that world. He was from Pakistan. So
you've probably answered this question many times in your career, but when did the desire to kind of like explore that fold that into your jazz playing come about?
Yeah, that's a concrete question for sure. Well, it's strange. I mean, it was sort of in my wheelhouse growing up to some degree. I mean, my parents are completely from that culture, and they didn't necessarily veer off too much in the Western front like right away, as we did. We were kids. We landed in the U.S. and we're out the door surfing, motorcycle, all the stuff you do in actually California, which is even another level. It's like, it's not like Oklahoma or something where, I mean, that's fine, but I mean, you're not going to necessarily surf and all that stuff. So there was a lot of outdoor activity, but when I came home, I heard definitely these sounds, and my dad was a hobbyist singer, so I would hear him sing, but I didn't make much of it. And then at 18 years old, they took me to a house party, which is, kind of, right down the street. We could have walked there, but of course, they're my parents, so we drove. So we drove down there, and there sitting down and playing was Zakir Hussain, and Shiv.
He was hanging out there.
Yes, and Shiv Kumar Sharma, the maestro himself, and no, they were playing. So they were on the floor playing right when we walked in. I was like, oh wow, look at these guys. There's some Indian guys playing. I was really naive, man. Really, like 17 years old or something.
It's like the heaviest cats in the music, right?
Heaviest cats in the music, for sure. And of course, when they started playing, I was like, technique was such a big thing when you're that young, and I just started jazz at 16. So you need technique in a certain way, the way I wanted to play, like George Benson and Pat Martino, and so technique was a very top of the line kind of area of the music that I wanted to hone. And when I saw these guys, I was like, oh my God. I mean, the technique on both of them was just, and of course, once I got past that, I heard the music too. And that was also incredibly moving. So that was my first sort of entrance or entry point to the music. And like directly, not through the television, not through records, but physically. And that was really cool. And from there, I decided that there's something here that I gotta sort of check out. But since I was really at the point, really checking out Charlie Parker and Joe Pass and these people and Benson and whatnot, it's a lot. It was a lot to handle already, so I didn't jump into that realm right away. I was still like, I gotta get my jazz stuff together. And that's what I was interested in at the time. So later on, I went back and studied.
Knowing that you had this project coming up and that you had music that you needed to write for, were there certain wells that you went to draw from in order to create the music?
Well, that's the interesting thing. They're not really wells. Like, I don't really compose like that. I compose much more intuitively. The whole thing is a well, so I don't have to actually walk to the well and look. It's there. I am the well. So not to bypass your question, but that is actually the answer that I like to give, because once you rely on intuition more, you're also relying on all the stuff you studied and heard and listened to, for years. I'm not saying I only listened to sort of one or two records of Indian music. I mean, I really went to a ton of concerts. I listened to a bunch of stuff. I, asked a lot of questions to people, to musicians of that sort. And that all has to come out somehow. And so I guess what I'm saying is, instead of thinking about it, I let the intuition play its role. And so that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is I knew Josh would be working on that side of the stuff already. So I didn't want it to be overly saturated with sort of ragas and Indian rhythms. And so I knew, if I would write it like a tune, the first A or something, and I got a really nice vibe happening, I would essentially not write anymore on purpose. Even if I heard something, I would stop and I'd say, hey, you take it on and you write something now. And so that way it was really going to be a collaboration. Now, like I said, there are a couple tunes that I just had to go in and I just finished and he added what he added. But for the most part, there are a lot of tunes, and he did the same thing. He had a couple pieces that he said, hey, I wrote this melody just a few months ago, but I want to rehash it. And can you do something with it? And I would harmonize it and then write an entire B part. we both talk about soloing. And then we got together a few times in New York to sort of hash it out and make sure it actually works. That's when the sort of the excitement boosted to another level.
And were you able to rehearse much as a quartet before you recorded, or were there gigs?
There weren't any gigs this time around. Usually I really prefer to have gigs, but we went in and we did, I think 3 or 4 rehearsals and just made sure everything was, on par and sort of where we wanted to sound like before we hit the studio. And then we had 2 days in the studio to work it out a little bit too. A bit old school, I guess. The old school, obviously they would be on the road all the time, so that's not the old school, unfortunately, here. But in terms of like working things out in the studio, it's not always concrete until you get to the studio and then, hey, let's do this and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. And so are you going to be touring with this band now that the record's out? You had things coming up this summer.
Yeah, we did do some touring on the West Coast, and we just played New England Conservatory, and then we're playing Joe's Pub on May 19th as a record release concert. And then after that, there were some things in September, sort of in the fire. We're trying to figure it out also. It's an interesting market right now, obviously, because pandemic and whatnot, and it's a very crowded market. So, yeah, and there's some hesitation too in terms of the presenters. Like, are people going to come out for all these things that we used to book? And I understand, but we have to kind of move forward now.
What's the reception of music that you've done in the past, the collaboration in India? Can you bring this group to India, and how is it received?
Yeah, I would think, it's interesting to say that Josh actually tours India every year. I don't, but he was just there for a month, and he had like standing ovations, and they really dig the fact that here's a white Jewish guy, really in the West we might say he's appropriating, but that's the thing. There's the difference between the West and East. They give him a chance first before they say, oh, it's a white guy playing our music. If you're really serious about it, and you're coming off and it's sounding beautiful and on a high level, then what's there to say? He's dedicated his life to it. So he does get like great audiences in India. Here he does tour here also, but we're kind of testing the grounds a little bit more, and with Europe too. I think Europe might be cool with that.
Right. I just want to press you on the thing about him in India. Now, is he playing Indian classical music? And if so, if the same people see he's playing and come out, and then there's this project that has a lot of jazz improvisation and just different things, are people going to be open to that, do you feel?
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, he definitely plays Indian classical music only out there so far. He's got himself and a tabla player. That's it. And maybe, someone holds the tuning together and all that. But India and Pakistan, they're acquainted with sort of this word fusion, which I hesitate to use because there's so many watered down versions of fusion. But look, you can't make a blanket statement like calling something fusion and then suddenly you know what it is. That's just belittling yourself, the music, that's belittling art. So if we call something anything, we decide to call it, you have to have a lot of space in that calling to be open and not make a judgment. So, if you're not like that, then you're probably not one of our audience members anyways. In fact, jazz has that issue right now. We call it jazz, but then like, what is it? There's a big question mark that needs to be there, silenced, sort of just let it happen. They've had bands like Shakti, and in fact, Shakti's out now doing some touring with McLaughlin. This is a totally different project than that. Theirs is more reliant on Indian music, and John seems to, from what I've seen and heard, he comes in and plays, with them and composes a little bit for them. This is more, I guess, chromatic heavy and a little bit more jazz heavy with the world music aspect in it. And I think they would be totally open to that.
That's great. I'm sure they'll be open. That'll be cool. Before I let you go, now this record, Charm, has come out. What's next for you? Is there another recording for this band, or you have some other things that you have in the works?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. You know, it's funny, like I was thinking about doing another record, but every time I had the whole orchestration and concept in my head, but this is the first time this has happened to me. It's a little scary. I'm not scared, but when I pick up the guitar, I feel like I'm sort of repeating what I know already. And so I'm not happy with what I write these days. You know, you get warned as you get older, like this is my 16th record with Josh, right? This is a collaboration, but since I did so much of the work, it is the 16th record. And sort of like, I don't want to repeat myself. And I know a lot of artists do. I mean, there are a lot of famous artists that I love that sort of don't sound any different than they did after 30 years old, you know, and they're continually making small variations of their music. And that's fine. That's the way they roll. But with me, I'm more sort of the Miles Davis mentality or the Keith Jarrett mentality. At one point, Keith was reflecting on exactly what he felt at that period of his life. You know, he played classical music. This is a long answer I'm giving you, but he played classical music for a while, and then he just needed to shut down, and he made this record, Spirits, which is all him improvising on different instruments. And he said he needed that, you know, and that's kind of like where I'm at too. If I did a record like this, I feel like I need to do something different now. And that's not just a thought process. That's an intuitive channeling that's happening. I don't know what it is, but when I pick up the guitar, I'm like, nah. I'm trying not to be judgmental, but that's too tuney. That sounds like a tune that I wrote, 25 years ago. Why would I do that right now? So this is a problem we all have, I'm sure.
It seems to me like this, that filter is going to push you to the next project, which is going to be cool. And, I think it's exciting that you're not, content to stay with what you know.
Well, yeah. And also I'm not very, content with sort of one directional kind of way. I like the artists that are always breaking it up and taking some kind of chance and not really thinking about their audience as much. I like that. I like those artists. I mean, I don't know, there's not a lot of them out there, but it's because you have to be able to obviously be able to afford that too, if you're doing things just for yourself with the hopes that the audience will like it. That's kind of the category I've been in for a long time. Then you might not have the audience that X, Y, and Z person has because they're sort of filtering towards that, but hey, we all have to pay our prices,
Definitely. Rez, thank you for your time, man. The record's beautiful. Charm. Listeners, check this out. It's on Whirlwind Records.
Thank you so much, David. Appreciate it, buddy.
Peace.
Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Van Doren Reeds and Mouthpieces. Be sure and check out the Van Doren Advisory Studio in New York City for all your sound sculpting needs. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Arlen's Good Beer in Bowling Green, Ohio. Sound by Marco Mendoza. The theme music is No FOMO, Mofo by yours truly. Produced by David Bixler. Be sure and subscribe to Liner Notes wherever you find your podcasts. If you like what you hear, I ask that you consider supporting Liner Notes financially. You can do this by going to the Liner Notes tab at davidbixler.com. Thank you for your consideration.